Next up, we're going to hear from Eliott on Polkadot's impact on the IoT industry and go into why we think Polkadot is a game changer for the IoT industry through Nodle, a distributed IoT network built on Polkadot. And Eliott is going to go over various use cases which are unique to Polkadot and IoT and present their potential impact for the industry, such as DAOs owning and controlling real-world devices. Welcome, Eliott.
Thank you. Well, hope you guys are enjoying Polkadot Decoded. And as we just said, presentations about Polkadot and IoT, and more precisely about how we Nodle are using Polkadot to change the IoT industry and hopefully, make a lasting impact. What I'm proposing you in terms of agenda is that, first let's go over who we are, go over some facts, what we are doing and what we plan to do. So, I'm Eliott Teissonniere, the head of blockchain of Nodle, and Nodle is a decentralized IoT connectivity network. We mainly focus on connecting small embedded IoT devices through the use of smartphones back to the cloud and back to their legitimate owners. We used to be running on another blockchain a long time ago and then switched to Polkadot and started a production substrate-based chain. But, let's jump into the facts. Just quickly before we jump in the event that you do not know what IoT means, it will mean Internet of Things, and it basically refers to any kind of device that suddenly gets connected to the internet, such as, fridges, ovens, dog collars, cars, etc. So, there's lots of things that people want to connect, or at least, want to sell you. And it turns out that there's over 10 billion IoT devices worldwide this year, based on Statista's numbers. That's quite a lot, but it turns out that they don't seem to be the most secure, as we've seen in the past few months and few years. There's no single month going with with no IoT device being hacked or being used for something else. We used to have the Ring bells being hacked and, smart webcams being hacked to turn into botnets and all those kind of things. Hopefully we can solve that. And another issue is that when you look at the actual numbers, it seems like most IoT devices and most IoT companies or manufacturers are using one of the big three cloud companies, being AWS, GCP, or Azure. And only 4% of them are actually using something else, which, to us in the blockchain industry is a bit weird, because we kind of want to provide more choice to our end users. And, it seems like those big three companies are kind of holding the whole IoT industry between their hands. And the last issue that we have noticed is that it's actually extremely expensive to build and connect an IoT device. If you wanted to embed a 4G connection with your device, you would have to pay for a SIM card slot or any SIM, then you would have to pay for a phone plan, even if you can kind of bulk negotiate it. And you would also have to actually increase the size of your device, because you would consume much more energy. Like 4G is not known to be battery efficient in a way in the IoT world. So you would have to add a bigger battery. There's a few other solutions that try to be cheaper and also more energy efficient, such as Sigfox and LoRa. But it seems like you cannot send much data through them, and you still need to kind of deploy your own infrastructure or pay, someone else's network to access it. So that kind of turns to still be pretty expensive. At Nodle, we're trying to do something else. We are using people's smartphones that are already here, all over the place, all over the world, in your pockets, on your desk, anywhere else. And we're using them to build an IoT network and to then connect nearby IoT devices back to the cloud and the rightful owner. By doing that, we can dramatically lower the cost to deploy such network, but we can also lower the cost for an IoT manufacturer to connect their device to the internet, because then they can, we are more cost efficient than other solutions, and they can just use a Bluetooth chipset, which in most cases is already embedded on their device and is not using a lot of battery extra. And to do that, we are focusing. One of our main focus is actually to be Polkadot Parachain. We've chosen to be a parachain for a bunch of reasons, but one of them was that when we first looked at how we could build Nodle, we looked at other solutions, and we always had to kind of reinvent the wheel. We are limited. We can't do everything we wanted, and we're also limited in terms of how much transactions we can send. And when you focus on an IoT use case, you kind of want to process a lot of transactions because there's lots of devices and they may trigger lots of transactions, but there's also some use cases on machine-to-machine payments that will need to happen at some point on the chain. And when you use solutions where you are not your own chain, it starts to be tricky because you can have to share all the network resources. Well, with us being a parachain, we would have our own chain in a way that's then connected to Polkadot. So that allows us to have ways more flexibility, ways more performances, but also upgrade and change the way we do things if we need to. And given how the IoT industry is evolving, it's evolving very fast, just like our crypto ecosystem. We don't want to be scattered by anyone. Another main focus for us is to be interoperable with other chains, meaning that we do plan to offer the Nodle services to other chains and relies on some of their services. There's more on that later in that presentation, but think tokenizing IoT devices and remotely controlling IoT devices from your chain. And thanks to Polkadot and thanks to everyone's efforts from the team and from around the ecosystem, we were able to actually roll out that solution. It's already live, and we have on a daily basis around 5 million smartphones participating in the network, and we are seeing around 80 million devices on a daily basis, which is just incredible from a point of view, at least. And that's happening through many different ways. One of them is that we have a Nodle Cash application on iOS and Android that people can install to be rewarded in Nodle Cash tokens. But we are also partnering with application developers to pay for their services and also provide an alternative to advertising in mobile apps. Just to maybe dive a bit more into how it's actually working. What we propose to do to our developers and to our users using the Nodle Cash app, we actually use a smartphone with a dedicated networking library that we then use to turn on its Bluetooth connection and just connect to nearby IoT devices that are already out there and actually just sending data all around the place, and that wants to send it to the cloud or to a manufacturer or anything like that. And we just then proxy that back through the Nodle network to the cloud or to the customer that wanted to connect its IoT device. So that could be you if you wanted to get data from your Nest thermostat, but that could also be a company such as the ones that are below. So we've had proof of concepts and live deployments with the city of Paris, for instance, Chipolo, which is building an alternative to TAL, the French National Railway Company, among others. We had a very interesting use case with dogs. And so that was a company building a smart dog collar over Bluetooth that you could just add to your dog. And if you are going to lose your dog, we were going to locate it and help you find your dog again, and have both of you guys back together and cuddling and all those kind of things. And in order to compensate people installing the app or the SDK on their smartphones, they actually receive some Nodle Cash tokens as a reward in a way. Now that we've had that connectivity / location service, we're looking at other things we could do and other problems we could solve in the IoT industry. And one of them seems to be that most IoT devices are known to be not so secure. There's a saying in the IoT industry, which is that the S in IoT stands for security. In the event that you didn't see that, IoT does not include an S. So we've been focusing on building with a major cryptographic chip manufacturer that's very well known to all of us, a cryptographic certification solution for IoT devices that will allow manufacturers to certify their devices and make sure that it's actually running the correct code, that it was not tampered with, and that it's fully operating under the best circumstances. that's taking full leverage from the Nodle chain and soon to be Parachain in order to keep what we call root certificates. I'm not going to dive too much into the details, but what we call root certificates on the chains, and then we use fuzz to then certify IoT devices. That's still under construction, but that's one of our main focuses right now. Apart from that, we don't just do certification and asset tracking / location, as in locating dogs. We've used a network to even transmit data from a sensor back to the cloud. So we've had an interesting proof of concept where we deployed a bunch of very small weather stations around the city of San Francisco, and then use a Nodle network to fetch their data and get weather data on a almost per street basis instead of a per city basis. And on top of that, when the COVID-19 crisis kind of started, we've been using our expertise and know-how in order to build a privacy-first contact tracing solution. That's not really using the Nodle chain by itself, not the Parachains. That's using all the cryptographic primitives we've been developing for the past 3 to 5 years. Now that I've kind of went over what we are doing, but what we want to do is now different. Like, we want to be a Parachain. We want to open our use cases and our capabilities to other chains. One of them will be that once you're a Parachain, we can either have another chain rely on the Nodle network to connect to nearby IoT devices. Could imagine a bunch of decentralized applications that want to support, remote IoT device upgrades, or decentralized organizations that will actually own a physical device and control it from the chain without having to go through any complex setup as we are doing today in our industry, among other things. Not only that, but we will also have the capability to trigger a call on another chain if we receive a precise IoT data, meaning that maybe you want to trigger an event when an IoT device is discovered, or when you detect somebody's at your door and maybe you want to unlock some kind of payment or anything. Obviously, we will offer our PKI / public key / certification system to other chains. And something that we've been very excited about, and that is a bit new to people for the Nodle network, is that we will be able to execute some precisely verified and sandboxed piece of codes on the Nodle smartphones to then interact with nearby IoT devices, meaning that you will not just be able to exchange data back and forth, but potentially actually script actual interactions and pilot them from the Parachain. And that opens, for us, that kind of opens a whole bunch of new use cases. We like to call them next-gen use cases. The one I'm personally most excited about is hardware, what I call hardware DAOs, which is the idea that you would have a decentralized organization as, you can think of Polkadot as a decentralized organization, actually, because it has its own governance mechanisms, it can upgrade itself, and can take decisions by itself. But such organization will then be able to interact with physical, real-world IoT devices at a precise location, meaning that let's say that we all want to crowdfund a smart autonomous car company. Technically, that will be possible through the Nodle network. Obviously, that's not something we're focusing on building, but that's a next generation use case that we're seeing. Another one that's a bit new and a bit maybe more interesting than the two last ones is the idea of tokenizing IoT devices. Since we can now connect and exchange data and order IoT devices to do certain actions through the Nodle network, you could imagine, you could piggyback on the first idea to decentralize the ownership of an IoT device, to just tokenize its ownership, and then everybody could own a piece of a maybe Tesla car or something, and maybe share ownership of it, and maybe maybe you could think of a way where you can redeem your tokens to then access the car and use it. Then a few other use cases that we've been exploring, they're a bit more common. That's why I'm not going to spend too much time on them. But the first idea will be to allow for what we call decentralized data marketplace that would allow IoT devices or IoT operators, as in manufacturers and companies owning IoT devices, to sell and buy or exchange the data from the IoT devices. If we take, if we go back to the small weather station example, we could imagine that there's a marketplace where this weather data can actually be sold and traded. The next one is going back to the idea of running small scripts on the smartphones to interact with an IoT device. We think it will be possible to think of that as an edge computing platform. There's, when you build an IoT product, in some cases, you kind of want to run code at the edge, in quotes, which means that you are trying to run most of your critical code, most of your application on the device itself before it actually sends the end result to the cloud or to your server. And that's it for today. Thank you for listening. If you guys have any questions, feel free to send an email. My email is below, but we're also hiring. So if you'd like to participate and help shape what the Nodle network is going to be in the very, soon future, feel free to send an email. And, I guess now is the time for questions.
Thank you very much, Eliott. We got a couple questions here in the chat. First of all, and apologies if I pronounced this wrong, can this be utilized for a low-Ra wireless RF technology mesh network to mine for a proof of coverage token or coin to implement a reward system for users to build another internet?
Yeah, actually, right now we've been focusing on Bluetooth because that's the main expertise from our team, actually. But we've had plans and we actually have a few experiments and starting for going on about supporting LoRa or other technologies such as IoT 5G, somebody wants to do it, or Sigfox or LoRa. And the beauty about the Nodle network is that it's much more than a service over Bluetooth. It's a protocol and it's a system that can be deployed over different communication channels. That can be LoRa, that can be Bluetooth, that can be, let's say, Wi-Fi stations or anything else.
Yeah, another question here, I think, sort of along those same lines. Someone was asking about Helium network and to just sort of explain the differences or why Nodle might be a better approach than what Helium is working on.
Well, obviously, I'm heavily biased. But when you look at Helium, I'm not the most familiar with Helium, but what I know is that in order to participate in Helium, you have to buy a $500 kind of router that you then have to plug into your network and run in your own house. To us, that relates back to a normal LoRa IoT network where you have to deploy your own infrastructure and you have to have people paying for gateways and set them up. In the case of Nodle, we are not doing any of that. We are leveraging people's smartphones to do that, meaning that you can literally use the device that you have in your pockets to just start, first of all, contributing and be compensated for that, but also that we are actually present everywhere. We just need somebody to install the app on their smartphone, and suddenly we'll be available in their city and we'll be able to connect devices from their city. And that's how we've been able to be on every continent we can think of, except maybe Antarctica, because there's nobody there. And that's how we were able to touch most countries. I don't have the exact number in mind, but we are in most of the top countries. And with just a few installations, we're able to cover a city in a few hours, which is not even thinkable with solutions like LoRa gateways, such as Helium.
Very cool. Darren was just dropping a fun fact about you in the chat. He said that you were the first person to deploy a marriage contract on Ethereum. Is that true? Or maybe tell us a little bit about that as we wrap up the session.
Sure. Well, to my knowledge, I am the first person to do it. I think I did that in 2017, back when I was CTOing a company called BitNation. And I had that idea to represent real world agreements via a smart contract. I was building a smart contract where people could get together. They would have actually to stake Ethereum to validate that they wanted to be married. We had to have witnesses coming and validating the agreement and everything. It's on my GitHub, if anyone wants to grab it and use it. And that was some kind of experiment that actually turned out well.
Awesome. Maybe we'll use the Aura rings for an IoT wedding ring in the future on
we should
Polkadot though in the future.
We should with
That was
any
awesome.
smart contract, and we would validate that you're next to your spouse, and you guys are
Nice.
willing to be married.
Well, I'm supposed to be getting married one of these days soon once the pandemic has cleared. So maybe we'll talk about options, and I'd happily be the first to put a marriage contract on Polkadot.
Do a Polkadot marriage.
Awesome.
Cool.
Thank you very much, Eliott, for joining us today.